Imagine for a moment that everything you thought you knew about the origins of Christianity has been carefully shaped, edited, and in some cases hidden. Think about the possibility that there are ancient, forbidden gospel texts that present Jesus not just as a man, a teacher, or a prophet, but as the very light of creation. How would you feel if you knew that the church throughout the centuries decided to silence these scriptures to protect a structure of power and dogma? Today, we are going to delve into one of the most profound mysteries, fascinating and disturbing aspects of spiritual history, the secret gospel that reveals Jesus as the primordial force of existence, the Alpha and the beginning of all light. Before continuing, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, share this video, and comment on what impacts you most throughout this investigation. I promise that what you will discover here can profoundly change your understanding of life, the universe, and your own connection with the divine. Because in the end, I will reveal the most profound teaching, powerful of all that has been jealously hidden to prevent you from awakening your true essence. Throughout the centuries, the church has acted as guardian of the official narrative. However, archaeological discoveries, such as the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, found in Egypt in 1945, opened a crack in that narrative. Among those texts, many attributed to the first followers of Jesus, we find fragments that present him not as a simple Jewish preacher, but as an incarnation of cosmic light, the divine spark that sustains all creation. Why were these words silenced? Why did the church label them as heresy when in reality they conveyed a message of profound spiritual freedom? The Gospel of Thomas, for example, is one of the best known among these apocryphal writings. In it, Jesus does not appear performing external miracles to impress the crowds, but rather revealing that the true miracle is the awakening of the inner light. The kingdom is within you and without you. It declares a simple yet revolutionary phrase because it dismantles the need for mediators between humankind and God. You can feel the power of these words. They tell us that we don't need temples, altars, or hierarchies to approve us. The connection with the divine is already present in every breath, in every spark of consciousness. However, this message was too dangerous for an institution that sought control and obedience. The church fathers in councils and decrees defined which gospels would be accepted and which ones would be condemned to oblivion. The question we must ask ourselves is what we lost in that process. What essential teachings were buried under centuries of silence? The forbidden texts reveal a Jesus much more universal, closer to the mystical traditions of the East and the Hermeticism of Alexandria than to the rigid dogma we know today. For the Gnostics, Jesus was the light of creation, the eternal Logos that manifested in human form to remind us of our true nature. He did not come to found religions, but to awaken souls. He didn't come to establish external rituals, but to ignite the inner spark that unites us with the divine. This perspective changes absolutely everything because it moves us from a faith based on obedience to a spirituality based on personal experience and the awakening of consciousness. Imagine what it would mean to live knowing that the same light that gave rise to the stars dwells within you, that your deepest being is a reflection of the eternal source. How would your way of facing fear change? The pain and uncertainty of life. This is the kind of reflection these forbidden gospels sought to convey, and this is precisely the reason why they were suppressed. Scholars like Elaine Pagels, author of the Gnostic Gospels, and Carl Gustav Jung himself, who wrote an extensive commentary on the Gospel of Thomas, show us that these writings are not mere fantasies, but gateways to a deeper understanding of the human psyche and the divine mystery. For Jung, for example, the figure of Jesus as an inner light connects with the archetype of the self, that totality of which we are all a part. Doesn't this resonate with the most ancient mystical traditions that speak of the unity of all that exists? But here is something even more striking. If Jesus is the light of creation, then he is not separate from you. He is not a distant being to be worshipped, but the very essence that beats within you. This idea has the power to destroy walls, dissolve hierarchies, and liberate human consciousness from centuries of conditioning. And perhaps that's precisely why he was considered too dangerous. I want you to stop for a moment and reflect on how you would feel if you discovered that Jesus' true message was never about fear, sin, or eternal punishment, but about awakening to freedom and union with the light. How would you react if you understood that the kingdom of heaven is not in the distant future, but here and now, in the depths of your being? This is just the beginning of a journey that will lead us to explore hidden texts, silenced revelations, and the true spiritual dimension of Jesus. And I assure you that the most important thing is yet to come, because in the end you will discover the most powerful teaching of all, the one that not only transforms your understanding of history, but can ignite the spark of your own inner light. Imagine for a moment the first followers of Jesus, men and women who had heard him directly, sharing his words among themselves in small, hidden circles. They did not speak of political power or empires, but of a luminous force that permeates all of creation. These disciples transmitted teachings that would later be known as Gnostic, centered on inner knowledge and the personal revelation of the truth that each human being carries engraved in their soul. For them, Jesus was not a founder of dogmas, but an awakener of consciences. But how did the religious and political powers of his time react when they realized that this message could free people from all external manipulation? The texts found in Nag Hammadi reveal a poetic language, and at the same time, profoundly subversive in the Gospel of Truth attributed to Valentinus, one of the most influential Gnostic teachers of the 2nd century. It is said that ignorance is like a fog that covers humanity, and that Jesus came as the light that dispels that fog to return us to the knowledge of our divine origin. It is an extraordinary vision because it is no longer about obeying commandments imposed from the outside, but about remembering what was always within us. It's not obvious why a message thus, it represented a threat to the ecclesiastical hierarchy. When the councils began to establish which gospels would be canonical, a filter was applied. Only those that upheld the image of Jesus as an external Messiah, as an indispensable mediator between God and humanity, were accepted. Those that spoke of an inner Christ, of a direct union with the divine without the need for institutions, were discarded. And here arises the great question: was it divine will to hide those texts? Or was it human will to maintain power structures intact? The Church Fathers, such as Irenaeus of Lyons, wrote extensively against what they called Gnostic heresies. However, in their critiques, we can glimpse the true content of these doctrines. Irenaeus was scandalized that the Gnostics claimed each person could attain divinity on their own, without the need for priests or sacraments. Do you realize the scope of this? We are talking about a message that places responsibility and spiritual freedom in the hands of each individual, not in the hands of an external authority. What would you choose? To live under imposed rules, or to awaken to the truth that you are a bearer of the same light that illuminated Jesus? Modern authors like Elaine Pagels and Jill Kispil have shown how these texts not only contained theology, but also profoundly transformative spiritual practices. They were not mere abstract theories, but paths of experience. The Gnostic disciples practiced contemplation and silent meditation, and sought a direct knowledge that transcended words and rituals. In a way, they were heirs to a universal tradition that unites Christian mystics with the yogis of India and with the Hermetic sages of Egypt. It is not surprising to discover that the figure of Jesus connects with a much wider network of ancestral wisdom in the Gospel of Philip. In another of the forbidden texts, we find a phrase that has generated astonishment and controversy for centuries. Do not make yourself a stranger. These simple and powerful words remind us that the distance between the human and the divine is an illusion. True exile is not from a physical Eden, but from the knowledge of our own essence. Jesus, according to this gospel, came to reconcile us with what we truly are, light manifested in human form. How would your life change if you understood that you are not separate from the source, but rather a living expression of it? What the institutional church considered dangerous was not the energy itself, but the freedom that these teachings granted. A man or woman who understands that they carry within themselves the divine spark can no longer be easily dominated by fear, neither through guilt nor through the promise of rewards in an uncertain afterlife does that human being become master of their spiritual destiny, and that in any era represents the greatest challenge to power systems. Here is where another mystery arises. If Jesus is presented as the light of creation in these Gospels, then his presence is not limited to the historical past. He is not only the teacher who walked in Galilee 2 millennia ago, but the living force that expresses itself in every instant of the cosmos. In this way, life, death, and resurrection cease to be linear events and become eternal, symbols of transformation. The cross, in this vision, is not only an instrument of suffering, but a portal to inner awakening. What would you feel if you knew that every trial in your life is an opportunity for personal resurrection? Let's consider this. If the church had accepted these Gospels, the history of Christianity would have been radically different. Instead of monumental temples, perhaps we would have communities dedicated to self-knowledge. Instead of holy wars, perhaps we would have cultivated a universal spirituality that united cultures and peoples. And instead of fear of punishment, we would have lived in the joy of knowing ourselves to be children of the light. Isn't it moving to imagine that other path? However, although the texts were hidden, they could never be completely erased. The truth, like the light, always finds cracks through which to penetrate. And today, having access again to these writings, we are offered the possibility of recovering what was denied. The knowledge that Jesus is the primordial light and that same light dwells within us. But the most impactful is yet to come. Because while these Gospels reveal an inner and universal Jesus, there is a final, hidden and feared teaching that transforms our entire conception of spirituality and human destiny. And that revelation will be the key that we will share later in this journey. Imagine that every word of these forbidden Gospels were like a mirror in which you could look at yourself and discover your true face. Not the one that society, family, or religion have molded in you, but the one that remains hidden behind layers of conditioning. The Jesus revealed in these texts is not a stern judge nor a distant redeemer. He is the manifestation of the eternal light that wants to remind you of what you have been since the beginning of time. This vision is so radical that it is no surprise. The church decided to bury it under centuries of silence, but today you and I have the opportunity to contemplate it with new eyes. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, although fragmentary, it offers one of the most powerful visions of this truth. There, Jesus teaches that salvation does not depend on following external rules, but on the capacity of each soul to overcome the fear and ignorance that bind it to this world. Mary is presented as someone who deeply understood this teaching, to the point that Peter and other disciples showed resistance and jealousy. The fact that a woman was seen as a privileged bearer of revelation was scandalous to the patriarchal structures of the time. Do you realize what this means? The light does not discriminate. It does not distinguish between genders, races, or social classes. It is universal, and we all have access to it. Isn't this a revolutionary message? Even today, the Jesus of these Gospels insists that the kingdom is not a geographical place or a distant future, but a reality that is already present. In the Gospel of Thomas, we read, "When you make the two one, when you make the inner like the outer, the high like the low, then you will enter the kingdom." This phrase is reminiscent of the Hermetic maxims of Alexandria. As above, so below. Here we see how the teachings of Jesus, as preserved by the Gnostics, engage with the most ancient wisdom traditions of humanity. It is as if all traditions point to the same truth, the unity of all that exists. If we accept this view, then the figure of Jesus transcends the limits of a specific religion and becomes a cosmic symbol in the Logos, which the Greek philosophers described as the divine reason that structures the universe. As Philo of Alexandria described it, already spoke of a Logos that mediates between the unknowable, God, and the manifested world. The Gnostics identified Jesus with that Logos, with that light of creation that sustains reality itself. He was not just another teacher, but the embodiment of the primordial force that dwells in every atom and in every human being. You can feel the magnitude of this revelation. The official church, by rejecting this vision, consolidated a Christianity centered on obedience and dogma. However, what these Gospels invite us to experience is an inner spirituality, an awakening that does not depend on intermediaries. This poses a profound challenge. Do you prefer to follow a faith that dictates what to think and how to live, or embark on the inner journey of discovering that you yourself are an inseparable part of the light? The answer is not easy because it implies responsibility. It means that you cannot delegate your spiritual quest to anyone else, but rather you must assume it in your own flesh and in your own soul. The gospel of truth says, the gospel is the revelation of hope. The discovery of those who seek is not about passively accepting a series of imposed truths, but about living a process of personal discovery. This emphasis on experience is what connects these texts with the mystical currents of all cultures. The Sufis in Islam, the Kabbalists in Judaism, the yogis in Hinduism all speak of an inner journey toward the light, and the forbidden Gospels show us that Jesus also belonged to this great universal current of seekers. Here it is worth remembering the words of Plotinus, the great Neoplatonic philosopher: we have never been separate from the divine. We have only forgotten our union with it. This phrase could perfectly fit into any of the Gnostic Gospels because it reflects the same idea. Separation is an illusion, and awakening consists of remembering our true nature. Jesus, as the light of creation, comes to tear the veil of forgetfulness and show us the way back. But this revelation is not only philosophical or theological, it is profoundly practical. If the light is within you, then every action, every thought, every word you utter has the power to radiate that light or to obscure it. This means that true discipleship of Jesus does not consist of repeating formulas or fulfilling rituals, but of living in accordance with awakened consciousness. And here I ask you directly, are you living as a bearer of the light, or are you letting fear and ignorance extinguish your inner flame? At this point in the journey, it is inevitable to feel a mixture of awe and indignation and admiration for the beauty of these teachings that speak to us of freedom and fullness. Indignation, because for centuries we have been deprived of them, reducing Jesus to a rigid and distant figure. However, the light never goes out, despite the efforts to hide these Gospels. Today they resurface with force, inviting us to look beyond what we were taught and to open ourselves to a direct experience with the divine. And most importantly, there is still more to be revealed. Because if until now we have seen Jesus as the inner and universal light, what is missing is understanding the supreme teaching, the one that has been feared and hidden more than any other. A teaching that not only transforms spirituality but has the power to change the destiny of humanity. Imagine that all your life you have walked in a room lit only by a small candle. That light, although sufficient to guide you, never allowed you to see the grandeur of the space in which you find yourself. Now imagine that suddenly the walls open and an immense, infinite light fills everything, revealing that you are not in a closed room, but in a horizon without limits. That is the experience that the forbidden Gospels promise. The awakening to the reality that Jesus is not only a teacher of the past, but the very light of creation, and that this light is also your own essence. The secret most feared by the church was not that Jesus was a great prophet, nor even that he was divine, but that the divinity he represented also dwells within you. The final message of these texts is that the spark of creation, the eternal Logos, is not outside of us, but in the very heart of our consciousness. In other words, you and I are expressions of the same light that gave rise to the universe. This teaching, so simple and yet so powerful, disarms any structure of control because it transforms each human being into a living temple, a bearer of the sacred. The Gospel of Thomas contains an enigmatic and wonderful phrase. When you come to know yourselves, you will be known, and you will know that you are children of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, you dwell in poverty, and you are poverty. Here is the key. Self-knowledge is not an intellectual exercise, but a spiritual awakening. Knowing yourself is remembering that you are part of the light that sustains the cosmos. And that reminder is the true gospel, the good news that transforms all, suffering into a possibility of redemption. The Gnostics understood that the greatest enslavement of humankind was not matter nor sin, but ignorance. Living without remembering who we are condemns us to inner darkness. But when the light ignites within ourselves, we understand that we have always been free. Jesus in these Gospels did not come to found a religion, nor to build temples of stone, but to reveal the living temple of our own being. Do you realize the impact of this? If the kingdom of God is within you, then the true spiritual revolution occurs in the silence of your soul, in the depths of your consciousness. Carl Gustav Jung affirmed that the Gnostic Gospels were one of the clearest expressions of depth psychology because they show the path to the divine. It involves the integration of the shadow and the discovery of the self. In that sense, the light of creation does not eliminate your humanity, but illuminates it, revealing that even your wounds and falls are part of the journey toward wholeness. This teaching frees us from guilt and fear to show us that everything in us can be redeemed when illuminated with awareness. Think about the consequences of embracing this truth. If you are a bearer of the light, then there are no necessary intermediaries between you and the divine. There are no hierarchies that can monopolize your access to the truth. There is no institution that can decide if you are worthy or not. You are already worthy because you always were. The light never ceased to dwell within you. The only thing missing is recognizing it, awakening it, living it. This is the most powerful teaching of all, the one that transforms slaves into free followers, into creators, believers into awakened beings. The mystic philosopher Meister Eckhart expressed it clearly centuries later. The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God... This phrase reflects the heart of the secret gospel. There is no separation between the Creator and His creation, between the source and the spark. You are that spark, and Jesus came to remind you of this. Now I want to invite you to an intimate reflection. What would you do if, starting today, you lived with the certainty that you are a bearer of the light of creation? How would your decisions change? Your way of loving, your way of facing difficulties? What would happen if we stopped looking for divinity outside ourselves and began to experience it in every beat of our hearts? The forbidden texts hidden for centuries return to the light today to remind us of this eternal secret. Jesus is the light of creation, but that same light dwells within you. No one can take it from you. No one can extinguish it. It is waiting for you to recognize it and live it in all its fullness. That is the most important and powerful teaching of all, the one that can change not only your life, but the destiny of humanity. Because when a human being awakens to their true essence, the darkness recedes, and when many awaken, all of history changes course. That is the call these secret gospels make to us today, to ignite our light and remember that we have never been separate from the source. Thus concludes this journey, but not as an end, but as a beginning, the beginning of your own awakening, the moment you decide to stop, living by a small candle and open yourself to the infinite radiance of the light that has always been with you. Thank you for watching.